All right, welcome back. Caitlin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Are you Al?
I'm doing really well. Caitlin Bigsby, Director of Product Marketing and Visier, going to talk about beyond transformation and how people analytics is really going to drive how we formulate, measure, and manage talent strategies, not only in the future, but right here, right now,
Mhm.
particularly as we're returning to the workplace in many cases. So if you would introduce yourself a bit and maybe elaborate on what you're going to talk about today.
Sure. So my name is Caitlin Bigsby. I'm a product marketing director for Visier People Analytics provider. Prior to working for Visier, I've been in HR tech my entire career, and I've been an implementation consultant and consultant working with HR organizations looking to transform how they do business. So I'm very familiar with this word transformation, and I'm kind of sick of it, and I think everybody else is too. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about why transformation really isn't what we need anymore. We need something different.
Oh,
So,
I love it. Now I'm already intrigued, and I'm
oh,
sure.
okay.
All right.
Glad to hear.
Well, hey, I'm going to get out of your way. I know you have some slides to share, and then when you're done, I'll come back and we'll have a quick discussion about it. Sound good?
I want to talk about going beyond transformation because we tried transformation. It kind of, to varying degrees of success if we had any at all. But really, it implies going from one thing to another thing. And I think we need something that's more of a fundamental shift than that in terms of how we manage people. And that's because there's just such a compelling need for change in people management. We have really been playing whack-a-mole with our people issues the last 12 some odd months, more than that now. There's one issue we deal with, there's another issue to deal with, and it's just been really kind of chaotic and reactive. But the good news is I think we've learned some lessons, and we've learned that we can change quickly and we can do things fundamentally differently. So let's look at some of that and why we need to do it. Because while we, and by that I mean the HR organizations and companies in general, have been adapting to this incredible change that was assailing us and how we had to do our work day to day, our employees were really reevaluating what they wanted out of life. They were, stuck at home with their family for good and for bad, and thinking about what their kids needed, what they need, what they want from employment, what makes employment enjoyable, what makes their life enjoyable. And this has actually led to a really big shift in what they want and what they're going to start demanding from their employers. Studies have shown a massive jump in people who are prioritizing their family needs over work. Not, of course, that we've taken our families for granted, but we really sort of recognize what they need from us and what really matters. The big societal movements of the last 18 months or so and beyond has also really inspired people to stand up for what they believe in. And this is reflected in a statistic that says about 50% of people are willing to take a stand at work and voice objections to management decisions or actions. And then at the final end, I think this, we've been talking about reskilling and automation for quite a while, but again, that huge shift in the last year and a bit has really got people realizing that reskilling is critical to their own professional growth. And there has been some concern that this incredible acceleration, technical acceleration we've undergone what's that going to mean for their career? And so they do really see reskilling as critical, and they do expect their employers to help with that and have a plan. And they have choices. They have choices about where to go. So they're not just sitting at home thinking these things and then cursing the fact that they're stuck. They're not stuck anymore. As the economy reopens, there are various results depending on the surveys that you look at, but some say up to 52% of people are looking to leave their current place of employment once they have an opportunity. And with the increase in remote work, up to 5 times more jobs can now are being advertised as being remote. They have that many more choices. Coupling that with a continued reduction in reduced labor force, and people who want to leave, if they have the transferable skills, they're going to go. And so you couple that sort of demands on the personal side from their employers with their options to leave, And you will start to see movement. In fact, Visier, because we're a standardized cloud people analytics solution, we're able to do benchmark numbers across all of our 7,000 customers. And we've started to see that shift already. So it's not something that is coming, it is here right now. Primarily, initially, this one is seeing that managers are starting to make the move. And we're seeing it by industry as well. We're seeing a real jump in movement in healthcare, probably not surprising. There are certainly nurses have been reevaluating what they want from life, but also high tech. And we expect the other ones are going to follow very, very soon. The other thing that has happened in this year has been a seismic shift in trust amongst everybody. And trust in leaders, whether that's NGOs, religious leaders, politicians, or CEOs or organizations, has dropped across the board. But for some reason, and I couldn't tell you exactly why, CEOs are still the most trusted of all leaders. And that shift, with the drop in trust across the board, higher trust in CEOs, that has led to a shift in expectations on the kind of leadership CEOs need to provide. And up to 86% of people in this global survey, this is from the Adamsen Trust Barometer, feel that CEOs should take a lead on societal issues and really take a stand. People trust information coming from their organizations. And in fact, businesses can really see a huge jump in trust by really being a guardian of the quality of the data that they share. So there's trust is a massive factor, but it's also, so in terms of how people work with data and information and how important that is, but it also said it sort of created new expectations of the CEO. And because of this, the CEOs kind of need to rethink their leadership style if they want to continue to be out in front and to be the face of their organization, because there are some people think if you're up on a pedestal, you can topple off that pedestal. So to live up to these new expectations, CEOs really need to embrace an empathetic leadership style. And they need to start to foster some changes throughout their organization that reflect these expectations of society. And to do that, they really need a strategic CHRO behind them to help create that kind of change. So this means for the CHRO that they need to be more people-centric and data-driven. So that's why I'm going to propose what we need is not a transformation, but rather a metamorphosis. So again, if a transformation is just going from one thing to another, a metamorphosis is going from one thing to something better. And I think we all have the capability to do that. But it's going to take some time and take some really solid thinking and a really data-driven tactical approach. And that's where this group comes into play. So we need to remember that the people are the business, and we need to create an experience that they want. And in doing so, that drives that engagement, it drives the innovation, and it really drives the business. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. We need to understand the nuances of our workforce and understand what they want in order to build strategic plans that will work for us. You can't just take a peanut butter spread approach across the board. You can't pick up something that works somewhere else and just wholesale move it over to your new place. You really need to understand what's going on. And of course, let the data guide your way, but act with empathy, be thoughtful about it. Everything else will follow. So it's all about getting out in front. This is about HR leadership that is agile, informed, and in control. Not so far out in front that you can't pivot as needed, but far enough out in front that you can start to lay down tracks, get out in front of problems, peek around the corners to see what's coming, getting your arms around the ephemeral HR problems. I always think that's one of the greatest challenges of making quantitative and qualitative change in HR is that something like employee experience is so kind of vague and encompasses so many different things. How do you get your arms around it and understand it to actually make a difference? You need to be more proactive. As I mentioned before, we've spent HR spent its entirety being reactive, but especially in the last little while, it's time to be a little bit more proactive and start to identify trouble spots before they become too hot and steer us down a path that we just can't recover from with this rapid changing world that we're in. and really show leadership how to create a data-driven roadmap. So this last point is, ideally we would like our CHROs to take the lead, but sometimes they're not always in the right mindset or have enough of an experience to do this. So that's where the people analytics practitioners can start to bubble up some of that change. So we start talking about taking time to understand the issues. We really need to understand our employees at every step of the way. So really understanding their journey with us, because every piece of it impacts our employee experience. So being able to kind of put ourselves in their shoes and understand that there's different pieces that come into play and impact how we feel and how engaged we are and how connected and motivated we are to really produce our best quality work. And, this is an example of, we can look at the employee experience and see things. We can write out a list of kinds of interventions that would make a difference. And any one of those things, any one of these activities or interventions are solid. They're worth doing. They're good things, but you can't do all of them at once. You don't have the resources to invest in everything. So how do you go about choosing how to start making change at your organization that will start to influence the bottom line? You really need to give it some thought and, again, understand the nuances of your workforce. So, if we take a group, in a small group of people, this is one person who's thinking, I'm thinking about having a baby, and updated benefits would really make a difference to how I feel. Or, this person who's tired of taking notes on their lap, and would really like some more collaborative spaces at work. Or this guy who just started and felt a little bit weak in the onboarding. I mean, you could hear any one of these anecdotes and go, that's it. That's where we're going to do something. And you probably wouldn't be wrong. You'd make the difference in at least one person's experience. But maybe it's not the biggest impact you can have. And when you sort of follow the scent of those anecdotes, this is, I think, where HR really goes off track, because they actually start to tackle an issue that it exists, but it's not the biggest issue that they're facing. So they're throwing a bunch of resources at something that's not going to be really have substantive change. And because it's not a massive issue in relation to other things, even if they make some results, it's not a big enough result for anybody to really notice. And that, I think, contributes to this sort of sense that HR goes around chasing its tail, doing things that don't really mean anything. It's not that there's anything wrong with the programs, it's that the programs are being targeted at really small pockets. And of course, finally, if you're going off on anecdotes or really small problems, you're leaving the bigger problems to just fester and continue to impact the organization. Whereas if you can take maybe a little bit more of a detailed, thoughtful approach, you might discover that while maybe it's not their top thing, something like career development is actually number 2 on the list of a whole bunch of people, and taking the time to invest in a career development change would actually have the biggest impact. So there's a lot of benefit to stepping back, surveying, not allowing yourself to be distracted by anecdotes or hunches, and really doing sort of a naive assessment of what you can see of the data you have to really uncover the biggest potential, the lowest hanging fruit to make impact, and then measuring the effects of the change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework that you can leverage to do this. And I've found in talking to senior leaders, this is actually a framework that can really help them conceptualize how to make analytics a part of their day-to-day work, and really kind of treat it like a guide, like your Google Maps in your pocket. So I hope you'll take it in the same spirit as well. Everybody here is usually the people that Al gets together are people analytics practitioners, and you guys know really what you're doing, but it can still be hard to get HR to see beyond the, oh, that's an interesting graph, and into something that's a little bit more meaningful. So this is called the Ask, Align, Act framework. I'm calling it a proactive problem-solving framework to really help drive this change, this future of HR, this metamorphosis of HR into something that's more proactive and out in front of problems. And it can be broken down really simply into ask, align, and act. starting with ask, which is really taking the time to understand the nuances of the workforce, as I mentioned earlier, to just step back, leave some of your biases and your presumptions at the door, and just do a naive assessment of the status quo and see what's going on, see where your pockets are. Then in the middle, aligning with the HR practitioners to sort of validate the initial findings, get some insight into where else you should investigate, and refining the research and preparing sort of a final report on what has been found and the recommendations to go forward. And then the final piece is acting. It has been a number of research has showed that for workforce problems, cross-functional teams that are empowered to come up with creative solutions for a clearly identified problem do a much better job of intervening and making a difference in those problems. So let's start with ask the right question. And this, honestly, I cannot understate how important this is. This is something that we do at Visier when we do rapid insights for our customers is, we talk to them, obviously, and we have an idea of what they're concerned about, but then we table everything they tell us and we just comb through the data and we look at it in multiple different ways to start to find the hotspots. And in fact, we often discover that the problems aren't where they thought they were. We have one customer who was certain that they had a turnover problem in their night shift, and we discovered actually they didn't. The night shift was fine. The turnover problem was in the day shift. And if we had allowed their bias to bias our own investigation or narrow the scope of our investigation, we might not have uncovered that information. So what we suggest is, you could take something like turnover or spans and layers or representation, and then just slice and dice the data in a number of different ways, like by company structure or business unit, job level, location, supervisor, and just continue to look at it a whole bunch of different ways and make note of where things stick out. And then once you have a few examples of where things stick out, you can start to kind of couple those things together to see if there's a relationship between the two. Is it job level plus org? Is it job level plus location? And start to really look for the big outliers that are sticking out. And the more details that you get, the more insight you can get. Then you can start to look at them, trends over time, or getting really granular, and really digging in and sort of pulling on that thread and see where it takes you. So you start with a really basic exploration and bring it into a little bit more nuance. Then when you have some of that information that sort of makes sense, the next step is to align with the practitioners. And these are the people who are on the ground every day talking to employees, to managers. They have a real sense of what's going on at the organization. And this is a really critical point, and I think it's a point that sometimes we miss. We think that we should be going through everything and getting down to the nitty-gritty final answer all on our own and then bring it forward. Whether it's a fear that we found something counterintuitive and they're going to reject it, or this idea that maybe they won't understand it. But the fact is the only way for the data to be actionable is for the practitioners to act on it. And for them to be interested in acting on what we find, we need to involve them in the process of discovery. But they can also provide a lot of valuable context. I mean, if they, for example, have a knee-jerk reaction that says, no, that can't be, well, why? Why is that? What are they seeing? And explore with them. Just sit down and say, well, I found this. What do you think? Well, let's look, and help them see. And they might actually give you some insight into things that you hadn't thought about and connections that perhaps live outside the data and need to be followed up with a little bit more in another format. Or maybe just a simple observation of, hey, maybe the engagement scores went up because the kids went back to school. And that is a true story, but from one of our customers, they could not figure out the jump in their engagement scores in September until somebody made that brilliant observation that the kids had gone back to school. But it's really, really important that this gets everybody on board, and it does give you that sort of focus on where to go next. So armed with that feedback, this is where we really start to tell the story of what's going on in the organization using data. So go back in, do some more digging into the patterns and trends based on what you've learned, and really This is also a great time to sort of look at what are the implications of doing nothing. If you have something going on somewhere that's positive, what are the implications of rolling that out a little bit more broadly? But we're really as humans, we're kind of short-sighted, and so really making it clear that this is a problem that is staring us down, and there is a limited amount of time we have to react to it, will really help motivate people to act, as well as allowing for you to quantify the impact of any changes that you might make, which again, if we're trying to really change how the organization functions, change the role of HR, and really just prove the value of the people analytics function, getting that baseline will really be helpful down the road. Then when you have the story, time to package the findings and share them back with the change makers. So we want to really step people through what you discovered. So, clear out some of the earlier just general investigations and really step people through what you found. We started here, this led us here. And when we looked at it, it showed us this. And by the way, these are the implications of doing nothing. Here you go. It's time to act on it, because clearly it's not acceptable to just leave it alone. This is something that requires some intervention. And it also allows the change makers to sort of start from the same page. So everybody has the same information, the same basis of facts. And they can also maybe, if it's an interactive share that you've been able to give them, allows them to kind of pull at their own thread and explore a little bit more. Maybe if they're given a number of people who are a flight risk, allowing those leaders to actually look at the faces behind the names will help crystallize what needs to happen. So this is actually a quote from, we recently hosted our Outsmart symposium, and this is Gary Russo, who, if you've had a chance to hear him speak, he's fantastic. I think he's spoken at some PAFOW events in the past, but they use the data and that storytelling as the opportunity to really crisply show leaders where they can act, because leaders, they're dealing with a lot of stuff coming in day to day. We can't expect them to filter through where the action needs to be, but by giving that kind of a clear report, a clear story, and a clear direction of where action should be taken, and where it's going to have the biggest impact, as long as they're acting on a problem that actually is significant and will make a difference to the organization, that allows leaders to make the necessary decisions. So finally, acting on the problem. This is, of course, outside the people analytics function, but it's been informed by everything that has come to date. Whoever's been brought together to act on this identified problem or opportunity is armed with information. They really understand what's going on behind the problem, and that allows them to pull through their bag of tricks. That list of HR interventions I showed at the front, and then some, and figure out what is best suited to meet the particular problem that's been identified. And with the information and insight into the implications of doing nothing, there's also the opportunity to build the business case for intervention and justify the cost. And finally, change management. People sometimes bristle at changes, particularly when it seems like that change is originating in HR, unfortunately. But when you have the data to back it up and you can say, this is why we're making the change, this is the benefit to the organization of doing it, it gives everybody kind of that guidance on where to go, and helps to get people on board with the change, which of course makes it that much more successful. And with the baseline and analytics built to monitor what's going on, the task force will be able to make sure that they're on the right track and monitor for signs of progress, show where we started, where we ended up, basis for measures of success and ROI, but also the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We've been doing this thing for 3 months and it's actually not having the impact we hoped for. Maybe let's try our plan B and see how that goes. Or piloting 2 different opportunities and watching them at the same time to see which has a bigger impact before rolling out across the organization. But being able to monitor the interventions over time really can help drive that change. So that's called our Ask a Line Act framework. If you have any questions about that, drop in the chat and I will answer them at the end of this when I have a chance to talk with Al. But the final piece I wanted to talk about was promoting data-driven thinking to the top. I know that for a lot of senior leaders in HR, it's can be a little difficult to shift their approach to management and to really start to integrate data into day-to-day decision making. Like I said, I've had a lot of success with the Ask Align Act framework and getting them to sort of see it as part of a process to management rather than something that sort of exists on its own. But let's take a look at some of the other things you can do. And these are all things that I've managed to pull from the success that our own customers have had. And again, we have Visier customers tend to outperform the average company. I think 26% better performance. We just had an IDC report showing numbers like that. And this is from RJ Milner, again, another really great speaker. I hope if you've had the opportunity to hear him speak, I highly recommend chasing it out. But he also says what they really focus on is drawing the connection between people decisions and people outcomes and what that means for the workforce and ultimately for the business. So before you start, or as you start, even if you are already underway, the most important thing you can do when you're running your people analytics function is to really understand the goals of the business. Everything we do for the people is ultimately to drive the goals of the business. So we can tie all the insight we get back to these goals, then that will really help the CHRO see where there's an opportunity to have an impact on the business, because a strategic CHRO or a CHRO who wishes to be strategic should be looking to impact the business with all the decisions that they make. So helping them connect the through line from insight to action to bottom line will really, really help them start to incorporate data into their daily work. This might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to propose creating analytic clickbait. That is, if you are tempted to make a dashboard with a whole bunch of insight, don't, and instead look for that one number that is going to really pack a punch and tell a great story. By all means, have the dashboard behind it to sort of justify or extrapolate or build on it. But starting with something that's really attention-getting and really meaningful and really provocative can, again, start to help the senior leadership think about analytics in a different way. This is the sort of example at the bottom was from Gary, and he basically said, rather than present a big dashboard of turnover showing 30% here, 30% there, and this, that, and the other, he just said, hey, did you know 30% of our new hires quit in the first week? Is this acceptable to you? That's going to get people engaged and interested in the data. This is kind of goes back to that being a value-driven organization and an empathetic organization, but once you have identified the North Star of your organization, the kind of organization you want to be, and the kind of initiatives you want to pursue, then talk about it constantly and orient everything back to that North Star. The more you put it up and the more you put goals into that context and the current state and where you're going, the more people start to sort of reflexively take that into account every time they make a decision. At Visier, we've really prioritized building diversity and representation at our organization. So we talk about it constantly. Every time we have a company meeting, we sort of look at where we are, where we want to be, what needs to change to make that progress. So everybody is thinking about it with every outreach decision, every hiring decision. It's constantly there. We know this is the kind of organization we want to be. So really clarifying that and making it easy for people to reflect on, again, starts to really build it into the muscle memory of the organization. This is a big one, I think, is showing not just your CHRO, but the entire C-suite, people progress over time. Unlike other areas of the organization, people change is slow. And it's sort of built through incremental changes. And it can be hard to see the difference. Again, especially if we're doing, what happens in HR often gets overlooked or downplayed by the rest of the organization. And it's really easy to break the connection between what HR is doing and some of the good stuff that is happening amongst the workforce. So help your CHRO show the impact that is happening by showing progress over time. So make sure that they are armed every time they go into the executive level meetings with progress, so that they can show how they're building towards those goals. And, prepare them to talk about it. Like, this is where we were 3 months ago, and, now we're here. And it's a small difference, but it's a significant difference, and it's in the right direction. So that will really, really help the CHRO both see what they're doing, or what they know to be true, but also to prove that value to everybody else. And this is what I mentioned before, that showing the impact of doing nothing is incredibly impactful. In fact, if you could do one thing, this is what I would suggest, is projecting where your organization will be if nothing changes. For example, if you're looking at increasing diversity, it will be very impactful to be able to show, what, if we don't change anything at all about our hiring process, our female representation is actually going to drop in 2 years, based on if we look at the trend of turnover. And that will get people to think, what, if you want to be a 50-50 organization, then you clearly need to intervene. You will not get there by inaction. Or just turnover in general. If you want to grow the organization by 20% and you have a turnover problem, well, not only do you need to hire 20% more people, you need to hire 20% plus whoever is leaving. And that's, there's cost to that, of course. There's lost productivity, there's ramping up time, but really, really, really broad strokes show the impact of doing nothing. It is much closer than our leaders like to think it is. It's far too easy to think that it's a long way off and that they've got plenty of time. And of course, going back to the previous slide about people change is slow. It's not going to happen overnight. They are not going to be able to bring up their numbers, their diversity numbers to 50% if they start in 18 months instead of today. So help them see that, help them see the urgency of that. And then here's some really quick tips that maybe you can do tomorrow, or just remember, again, business is your stakeholder. So align to that. Even if what you are bringing forward, you're bringing forward to people within HR, ultimately the business is the stakeholder. Think about delivering data and interpretation at the same time rather than just the data. This will help leaders become a little bit more self-sufficient if they don't have to rely on some help to interpret what they're looking at. So help draw their attention to what they should be paying attention to. Again, they've got limited time, so really allow them to allocate whatever space in their brain that they have. Allow them to allocate that to where it matters by helping them see where it matters. And then iterate until the insight is usable. So if you are concerned that your leaders aren't using the insight, ask them why. Ask them what they need, and keep sort of tinkering with your deliverables until they can start to actually make decisions with the data that you're providing them. And that's all I've got. So Al, shall we chat? And like I said, you can find me on LinkedIn. I welcome it. I am the only Caitlin Bigsby out there.
I'm coming back. Hey,
sorry, Al, did I catch you off guard?
No, you didn't catch me off guard at all. As soon as I press come back, it takes a second or two. And I have some notes. So okay. Let me start off first off by saying thank you for calling out the distinction between transformation and really creating something that is going to get us to a place that's desired. And I just to emphasize your comment of showing the impact of doing nothing, how much of a motivator, that is, because that, of course, is a decision in and of itself. I want to pick up on a point that I think is really key, where I see a lot of organizations getting stuck. You used the term task force. Mm-hmm. And with response to COVID, there have been quite a few task force or tiger teams, or we want to call it, spun up to look into how employees were responding to remote work, looking into their well-being, trying to find out how they can support them. These task force were most often multidisciplinary. They included facilities, IT, HR, operations, among others. And now we have this return to workplace strategies, or hybrid work strategies that are being formulated. Some organizations are really leveraging people, data, and analytics to inform these strategies. Others are not. And so in your view, obviously you work with customers who kind of not only are drinking the Kool-Aid, but they're making the Kool-Aid because they're using your tool. But of the ones that are not or are slow to adopt, why do you think that is? And maybe more importantly, what do you think is going to shift that? So, hey, this is really going to be a way that we're going to formulate our talent strategies moving forward with these multidisciplinary, task forces, or, it might be beyond task force. It might actually go to an ongoing, governance body. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
It's a good question. I think, trying to do anything without data and insight is, good luck. I think you can. I mean, certainly you can do stuff. You can follow your gut and see.
Yeah.
But you're never going to really know. You're never going to really know what's optimal and what's working. So I think it's really, really important to invest in that. I said, obviously, I'm a bit biased, but that's true of everything. You have to know what's going to make a difference, and you can't operate by your gut. I mean, one of the things actually I think that's really should be taken into account when we look at return to work, for example, is there is a sense that women will take advantage more of remote working over men, which will create this sort of male environment, which on its own is not necessarily a bad thing, except then you couple that with the idea that some managers still very much reward FaceTime. Are we going to start to see a divide again? How can we know unless we have some data behind that? We just can't. How can we avoid that bias if we don't have any data behind it? So there's real risk to not introducing data into these strategies. And so I do think it's really risky. And, I hate to lead with risk for organizations because, quite frankly, boring, but it's true, right? I mean, we're talking about CEOs and CHROs taking ethical societal stands. There's if you are faced with a lawsuit on inequity, that is a massive punch in the face, and consumers will very much choose to reward or not reward organizations that are seen as societally progressive. How can you take the risk that you are building a new world in which we're kind of reverting back to old roles again and starting to see those gaps? So it's for that reason alone, I think you need to have data in place. But the other flip side is to be effective. Otherwise, again, we're guessing what is effective and what isn't. And we're going by gut feel.
Yeah. As you're talking about data, and obviously you're working with the product and you're working with customers and prospects to understand where their priorities are. And I have long been an advocate of first who, then what. And in other words, who is going to be asking the questions, and who then in turn is going to go and answer those questions, and then advise, okay, what data do we need? What analysis are we going to do? And so forth. So going back to these task forces, the idea that they know what they want is sometimes, I say this compassionately, it is not always accurate. In other words, we as subject matter experts in HR and in people, data and analytics in general, we have visibility into possibilities and insights that they don't. So we have, correct me if I'm wrong, a responsibility to shop, market our products, our services, our insights. And then it in turn invites the question, who do we market it to, and for what purpose? And I'm increasingly of the thinking that it can't just be an HR executive. It can't just be, one executive at a time, that we literally need to get an executive team, a governance body, task force, tiger team, whatever it is, on the same page. Yeah. So can you speak to your experience when you talk about those organizations that are using Visier successfully, insofar as it's really informing their talent strategies on an ongoing basis? What are some of the critical success factors that you see? Is it that they have a governance body in place, or is it some other factor that's driving their ongoing success?
There are a number of things. So there's a number of components to that question. So you say you can't do it one by one, but and sometimes I think that's not a bad place, because you're not going to be able to pull together a task force of executives unless they have each been, you know, they've got limited time. They're not going to give up their time for something like this unless they are convinced of the difference. So I think, I think it is worth it for the proactive practitioner to go around and kind of individually shop it around, then bring people together and start to show things. But that goes again to, you know, we don't always, the people on the task force don't always know what they don't know. And this is, again, where the analytics function has the opportunity to say, hey, yeah, you don't know this, but this is significant. It's significant and it's actionable. That is really helpful. I mean, there's nothing, trust me, I have been on a number of task force that have been brought together saying, here's the problem. And just everybody going, you know, like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do with this. So much better to come together and say, here's the problem. This is what we see. This, you know, all these things suggest areas where we could possibly intervene. Now we're going to turn it over to you to come up with the best way to intervene. But to the bigger question about the companies that are doing things right, you know, we have a lot of, actually, we have a lot of incredibly talented people analytics practitioners who have done a lot of that, who have sort of bubbled it up. We've also have a lot of very visionary CHROs who've said, this is what we need. They've looked, they've seen the writing on the walls. They know that's the difference that needs to be made. And they say, you know, this is the function, go build it. So it's a little bit of back and forth. But for a lot of CHROs and even executives, again, people are always seen as fluffy and unquantifiable, and we haven't been able to quantify them. And it is really the visionary analytics practitioner who can sort of rip the veil off and show what it is we can do and what we can know. But we have, so some of the tips that I had at the end there about creating that kind of organization, as I said, they came from our customers, and they were, you know, keep the business in mind. That is who you are talking to. People decisions drive the business, or they should drive the business. So that's what makes people sit up and pay attention. It's how you quantify things. It's also, if you can keep it in mind and help them read the information, then again, they start to matter and integrate it into their decision-making on a regular basis. And we actually have a number of customers, the customers that we have that have really prolificated people analytics decisions across the organization. They have the most users. They actually kind of jumped over HR at first and right into the hands of the business, because you know, while analytics is new to HR, it is not new to marketing or finance or manufacturing or supply chain, any of those things. So it's, in some ways, it can be actually easier to get the business leaders thinking in terms of data if you can give them good, clean data that, not clean, I'm going to take that back. Close enough is good enough.
Yeah, right.
Better to be mostly right than entirely wrong or entirely uninformed. But it is, you know, if you can give them that and in the sort of language that they understand, then it can kind of, you know, create this demand back to HR to know more, and then that, you know, can get the rest of HR thinking along the same ways. But it's a multi-pronged approach. For sure.
You know, I love what you're sharing on many fronts. And yeah, as we start to wrap up now, I want to make sure we cover, you know, two quick things. And they're not quick, but I just want to touch on it and get your take on. So diversity, equity, inclusion is a massive priority for, you know, all organizations now, or at least it should be. Yeah. There's also the case where, you know, employee experience and understanding culture and creating inclusive environments is also, you know, a massive priority. And there's certainly an overlap between those two themes. So there's a common thread among the discussions that I'm having with people analytics practitioners, CHROs, business leaders, and others, is that, hey, we really want to understand how people are thinking and feeling. And so, and they're saying, well, we have all these systems. If I'm thinking of a head of talent or someone like that, oh gosh, we've made this investment, we don't, you know, have any more budget. And so the idea that they have spent all this money on these transactional or process-based systems and that they're automatically going to produce the insights that they're looking for is, I think you'll agree, erroneous thinking. You know, there needs to be a means in which to aggregate the data, analyze it, and then produce, you know, the outputs at scale at speed and have something that is, sustainable. So, my question, to you might be, somewhat obvious. If I am trying to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion and the associated metrics in my organization, if I'm trying to improve the employee experience and create more inclusive environments, I need the appropriate data to shed light on what's happening, what's not happening, how people are thinking and feeling. And that takes a concerted, oftentimes separate investment in technology, in time, in money, and so forth. So would you echo that, and how would you qualify that?
Oh, 100% agree. I think we were kind of sold a bit of a bill of goods that by moving from one HR system to another HR system and introducing just self-service transactions that somehow we'd really transform. Again, that's why I kind of ditch the word transform. It's not where we want to go. But having done that, there's no going back. But look, just because you have done so, I mean, there's good reasons to go to these systems. I mean, I'm not going to, and they're good at what they do, but no, they're not going to give you the insight that you need. However, an investment in analytics will 100% give you the ROI. I mean, you can start to not just, you will get your money back if you use it properly, 100%. Visier customers get, I think, 283% return on investment over years. So don't think of this as spending money. Think of this as investing money. And let's start with DEI, because I think that's, as you mentioned, that's on everybody's mind. And if you are just starting, the fact is you can start with that core data that you have in your HRIS. But moving it into a system, into analytics where you can actually, do some of that projected growth. Like, what do we need to change to increase diversity? Do we need more female applicants? Do we just need to hire more women? Is it a bit of both? Starting there is good. Just getting the baseline. You can't change anything if you don't understand it. You can't make that. You can't make people, the top of mind thought. If you're not saying, hey, I know you think we're doing great, we're not doing great. we could do better. And you can start with some really core basics. I mean, with about 8 metrics, you can learn a ton about what's going on in diversity. Now, the listening part, the inclusion part, that might take another small investment in something, an employee experience platform or a passive listening platform. But if you have your analytics system first, and again, that's where you need to start, that will give you a sense of, picking your priorities, getting people mindful of the issue. Because remember, mindful and, and buying in and change management, so critical. Then you can introduce some passive listening to start to see what's going on. How are people connecting with each other? O&A data is another example. Then you get that, bring that in to look at alongside of your demographic data and where you're going. That just explodes what's going on and really lets you go next level down to just beyond representation and into actual inclusion changes. So it's a great place to start. But I said, don't think of analytics as a cost. It's not. It's an investment.
Yeah. And not only do I echo what you're saying, I am, increasingly passionate about it, given the opportunity cost, both financially and humanistically. I mean, people will suffer if strategies aren't driven by data and the knowledge inherent within that data.
100%. Well, so, if the available labor market is shrinking because men leaving the workforce or women, remember, minorities and women were the most impacted by job losses during the pandemic. So there is a huge potential work pool to draw from. So if you can understand that and understand what you can do better in your organization to welcome people in, you are light years ahead of other organizations when it comes to talent. You have such an untapped pool of talent that you can reach and make welcome. And wow, you're going to be way up in front.
Yeah. Well, Caitlin, again, thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing what you do. How can people learn more about you and what Visier is up to?
Well, of course, you can say Caitlin Bigsby on LinkedIn. I'm the only one of me, so easy to find. And also check out Visier.com or Visier also on LinkedIn. We got a ton of great resources for you to explore. We have a new IDC report any day now that will talk about some of the, or help you build your business case if that's what you need to do. We've got a lot of resources you can leverage.
All right, Caitlin. Well, thank you again. You be well. And yeah, hope to see you before too long. Yeah.
Me too. It's been way too long, Al.
Way
Take
too
care.
long. Take care. Bye-bye.